Well, as I said, my name is Barbra Siperstein. My friends call me Babs. My enemies call me something else that starts with the letter B. And as a political activist, I take that as a compliment because it means I'm doing my job. I'm parent, grandparent, small business owner. Used to own and breed standard bred horses. And I often describe myself as a woman who's been scarred by many years of testosterone. I was actually very, very lucky. I was married for 34 years to a woman, a partner, who I guess was the type of person that could make lemonade out of a lemon. You know, your husband comes out and says, well, I don't think I'm quite the man you thought you married. But it's something that I guess I was in denial for many, many years, and started to come out as a part of the midlife crisis. My world, actually we traveled for many years, lived a double life. I could not be the woman in New Jersey, but we were able, whether New York, New Hope, we met many other middle-aged, middle-class couples where the husband was trans to one degree, and we actually traveled around the world. But everything changed in October of 2001, where my wife suddenly died rather suddenly. She had cancer that had metastasized, and it was only a month after the diagnosis, and she was gone. At some point, I looked around. I realized if gays and lesbians were second class, what was I as a single trans person? I was not particularly happy. I had just started to learn a little bit about activism. We had our group, Gender Rights Advocacy Association of New Jersey. Really started about a year before that. I was still a newbie, still learning about things. I looked to New York, where the gay movements are stonewall, and it was actually started by the drag queens and drag kings, or trans men, trans women. One threw the first punch, one threw the first bottle, whatever. It really started the Stonewall movement. But yet, in New York State in 2001, they had a law. There was a big push by the gay community to have a non-discrimination law they call SONDA, sexual orientation only, but they refused, the lesbian gay powers refused to add protections for the trans community. And that certainly affected my own thinking, and I had, just before she got sick, I had gotten involved. I actually met Sylvia Rivera. I had a little idea of what was happening, and so there was this awareness, the awareness of the experience in New York State. And I guess in my grief, I channeled the grief, that energy, into going forward. I guess I listened to my mother always used to say, when I complained about things, God helps those that help themselves. And it was just a matter of channeling everything, going one step at a time, learning from the experience in New York State, learning about in other areas. And the very first thing in 2002, we was able to, with a small group of people, to add gender identity expression to the very first anti-bullying bill. And I saw, to make changes, you had to get politically involved. So even though my first LGBT mentor was the former president of the Log Cabin Republicans, which was a gay Republican club, I could see changes. Certainly George W. Bush, the compassionate conservative, was neither very compassionate nor conservative, and there was a definite change between the two political parties. One could argue, perhaps during the 90s, when Governor Whitman certainly was open to gay people, certainly had enough, maybe semi-closeted in her administration, but there was definite change. So I got involved with the Stonewall Democrats, and learn, you learn the rules. Like in life, you learn the rules, and you try and make those rules work for you. I kept on showing up. I guess I can refer to, I think Woody Allen once said, you're familiar with the director, producer, comedian. He once said that 80% of success in life is just by showing up. And it's really true. If you're not there to take advantage of an opportunity, it's an opportunity missed. And perhaps I was lucky in that sense, having the opportunity to show up, and then maybe sometimes when I open my mouth, I've got big feet, so it was hard to stick my foot in my mouth. But many times it worked. One of the things that profoundly affected me, back in 2004, I becoming originally active with the domestic partnership legislation. It gave me an opportunity to be a delegate at the Democratic National Convention in 2004. It was the first from New Jersey, and there were perhaps part of the official delegation, 5 other trans people from across the country. It was very frustrating because we tried to get the Democratic Party to add some sort of recognition in their platform, in the political platform, for transgender rights. For example, they came out, there was a plank that they were in favor of gay rights, gay and lesbian rights, but they refused, the Kerry campaign refused to really acknowledge the trans people. But being there, being at the convention in Boston, being actually appear as a delegate with state legislators, senators, congresspeople, I had an opportunity to be there, make an awful lot of connections. We came back in 2004. There was a decision by our group to try and amend New Jersey's law against discrimination, which is very powerful legislation that prohibits discrimination for various categories in employment, in housing, public accommodations, and also in the schools by as well treated as a public accommodation. We work with natural allies. I think one of the first transgender advocate in New Jersey was a member of the National Organization for Women. And so working with women, the women's rights, they were natural allies. And it actually worked out with the former president who worked of now, New Jersey Now, was worked in the Attorney General's office and helped working with experts. We were able to craft the right language to amend the law against discrimination. Then to put it in. There's one thing we got in the assembly. In early January of 2005, we had the right language, but for 2 months, I was very, very frustrated trying to find a sponsor in the state Senate. And I'd certainly met people which I thought were friends in the Senate. Nobody in the Senate wanted to sponsor the bill. The first person I went to was a extremely liberal senator. He was a freedom rider during the civil rights movement. I knew his wife, his plumber. The only person that could fix his heat that winter was a person that came out as trans to him. Wouldn't do it. And several others. And why? Finally, the ACLU would not support, ACL, how more liberal can you get? How much of a champion of liberal causes? The ACLU. They wouldn't do it. And finally, the answer was, we thought you'd fail. We thought you'd fail, and in failing, we had some rights that were under an appellate court decision from 2001, the Enriquez decision. That was a matter of a physician, a fairly prominent physician that ran a clinic in South Jersey. Somebody was on the board of the College of New Jersey, so it wasn't like a new doctor. Was fired, fought back legally, had the ability to legally fight back. And then this appellate court decision basically said that being a transsexual was covered under the law against discrimination. But it also said one other thing, that being a transsexual was also covered under the law against discrimination as a disability. And that struck home. It was a disability because of societal stigma. And that struck home with, we thought you'd fail. Because we as a class bore that stigma. You're unable to do things. And it's not that we can't, but society, that's how society sees it. And that's, talk about education. It's all about education, showing up, education. Well, the networking actually from the being involved with the party helped, because a friend who had helped out on a campaign got a job with a new state senator, and she taught this freshman state senator to put in the bill. From there, we basically took over, organized. I'm not going to go into the detail. I may refer to things. We ended up, as you had mentioned, in the shortest period of time. Now there are 17 states that have such laws. No one has passed it by a wider margin. But it's when you're organized, when you work together. New York State still does not have statewide protections for trans people. There's some that New York City does, Rochester, Buffalo, some towns, but New York State still does not have protections. Massachusetts had marriage equality since 2004. Massachusetts has only 2 years ago passed some protections for trans people. It's the organization. It's building, it's framing the issues the right way. It's working together. Most of it, as I say, the natural allies are with women, because there are so many things that are shared. And it's about empowerment. It's about putting together the right kind of critical masses. And when you're a minority, and certainly trans people most of our people are closeted. As a matter of fact, it turned out the one person that held up our legislation for several months was perhaps the single most powerful staffer in Trenton. Was I believe to be a closeted trans man. That's a whole nother story. And realizing relations. Always pays to show up in the cafeteria and see who's eating with at the State House. But one of the things I think you had mentioned about, I figured I'd bring up, the United States not being on the cutting edge, certainly with transgender rights. In the military, we have now, don't ask, don't tell. You can be openly out gay, lesbian, or bisexual in the military, but if you're trans, you're gone. A friend of mine who just retired after she had done 2 tours in the Middle East, started her transition, was called for a 3rd tour in Afghanistan. She had already started her transition, but she had this contract with the Army, and she managed to find American doctors, military doctors that helped with her, the meds, the hormones, but she served fearing 2 large organizations threatening to end her military career. One was the Taliban, the other was the U.S. Army. But she managed, in spite of that, to get promoted to Sergeant Major, E9, which is the highest enlisted pay grade, and got a Bronze Star for combat valor, but could not be out. So this is something that's we're certainly working on. I worked with the having a little pulpit as a member of the Democratic National Committee and involved with other national organizations. It's helped getting some things done, getting an awareness. One of the things we do in the transgender community, it's around November 20th of every year. You've probably heard about the Transgender Day of Remembrance.
Yes, when we do it here.
And more and more schools are doing that. One of the things I had pushed the administration from the very beginning, and in 2012, I was there at the White House for the very first observance of the White House of Transgender Day of Remembrance. As I say, there's so much more. There's so much more that has happened. Certainly, as I became involved, there's still in 33 states you can be fired for being perceived as being trans. 29 states you can be fired for being gay or lesbian or being perceived as such. That's why there's trying to put through the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. That's a whole other thing. I had my own little war with Congressman Barney Frank. That's time for another. One of the questions that you asked about the Democratic National Committee, when I was confirmed, I was as the first member. That was believe me, it was a great high. It was very exciting. But what was much more significant was perhaps 5 minutes before I was confirmed as a DNC member, is that the Democratic National Committee added to their charter and bylaws the trans non-discrimination statement and also a statement for full inclusion of trans people within the party. I'm going to come and go. That's going to last.